It is December. We made it. Last month of the year, and it has started off really cold. We want to let you know what really the rest of December is looking like. I'm 13 News meteorologist Matt Standridge. It really felt like winter came early right there at the end of, November and going into December. We've had multiple snow chances already. So what about the rest of the month? Well, before we get to the outlook, I wanted to paint a picture of what December is typically like. You're thinking, Matt, it's cold, it's cloudy, and sometimes you get snow. Yep, we could wrap things up and be done. But I want to put some extra numbers to it. Of course, the big reason why we have these seasonal changes will be the daylight changes. Not only losing daylight, but the angle of that sunlight trying to warm us up. Here in December, we are about to turn a big corner, but as we're rounding this corner, going from losing daylight back to gaining daylight, we don't actually have a big swing. In fact, most of December is about the same. You're looking at these numbers, they're really small. Honestly, they're not really even that noticeable, but we are expecting to be losing about 8-9 minutes across Indiana, just a little bit more farther north, a little bit less to the south. But in December, we have our shortest days and our longest nights. December 21st is the winter solstice. That's when we will stop losing daylight and we'll start regaining it, but it'll be very, very slow. Now, this is a net loss. So for example, we actually lose here in Indiana, I'll zoom in, 12 minutes of daylight all the way to the winter solstice. We gain back 3. So you put that together, it's about an 8 or 9 minute loss. 9 for the northern half of Indiana, 8-minute loss for the southern half. All right, let's take a look at some of these other numbers. Sunrises and sunsets, that's how we calculated those numbers in the first place. But for Indianapolis, right there, around Christmas to the end of the month, our sunrises will be after 8 o'clock. Our sunsets really don't change very much. They kind of meander from 5:20 to 5:30, but we have our earliest sunsets out there. So once again, that net loss of 9 minutes, but we're starting to gain it right there back at the very end of the month, the last 7, 8, 9 days or so. Speaking of December, we get our cold moon right at the beginning of the month. It's the last stretch of these super moons. We've had 4, or this is the 4th. But there, the night of December 4th, we get it. May have some clouds, but anyways, it is the cold super moon, also known as the moon of popping trees, because when you get this really cold air, any kind of water trapped in places, you can kind of hear it kind of pop. A lot of different plants can do that. Also, the winter making moon. I like that. It's definitely going to be more wintry here as we enter the month of December. It's already been kind of wintry. You know, we have meteorological winter starting December 1st, and then we have real winter, or, astronomical winter there starting on the 21st with the solstice. Generally, from the start of the month to the end of the month, we, on average, start in the 40s. Our average highs go to mid-30s by the end of the month. When you look at precipitation, when you take all rain and snow put together, but you melt everything so it's just liquid, we get 2.92 inches. That's the average over the past 30 years. And when you combine all those temperatures, a lot of times our average highs are in the low 40s. Of course, we're never just consistently there in the low 40s. We have all these swings. You get much colder days, and sometimes you can get some warmer days. And we've started December really on the cold side. To kind of talk a little bit more about the change in the daylight and the temperature, right? Of course, we're losing more heat than we gain in a day on average. So, and of course, it depends on clouds and everything like that. But we're losing heat. That's why we're continuing to cool off. But we also have a very low sun angle. In fact, this time of year at noon, the solar noon, we have the lowest sun angle of the year, 27 degrees there, about mid-month. So we're here at the bottom. That sun is low in the sky. The moon on the other side is kind of the longest moon that we'll have. But once we can get the more daylight and the sun angle to go back up, we'll start warming things back up eventually. It's a very slow process though. But here we are, darkest days, lowest sun, but you got a lot of golden hour time, right? When the sun's lower, you kind of have everything look a little bit more orangey and red and purple. So that's kind of nice there in the evenings when you can see the sun when it's not cloudy. Speaking of clouds and the sun angle, you kind of put both together for your UV index. I mean, we're registering at a 1. You're not going to get a sunburn here in December. It's also a windy time of year. You already know this. We've already had the wind howl this late fall. We continue to watch the average speed of wind on a daily basis go up. So when you average that out, sustained winds, in December, typically 10 miles per hour or greater. Of course, you get it calm at times, but then you get really windy at others. But we are in our windy season. They don't call it Windiana for nothing. Plus, a lot of times those winds are coming in from the north and west over Lake Michigan. Basically a cloud machine. Sometimes you get lake effect snow showers too, especially farther to the north, but it's our cloudy time of the year. We're right there. These 3 months, December, January, February, cloudiest time of the year. The spring's pretty cloudy too with those rain chances, but we are really in the cloudy season. So 57% of the time, on average, you're either mostly cloudy or you are overcast. More days are cloudy than they are sunny. And sometimes those clouds bring some snow. So we've already had a little bit of snow. We've already had a couple inches. We'll see how the rest of the month plays out and the season plays out. In December, we typically get 6.5 inches, give or take, just a little bit, and that'll continue to go up. So it's actually our second snowiest month on average. We'll see what this year brings. But we are in the snow season. We've already got a few inches. How much snowfall do we typically get? This is a map across the entire state. It's crazy, the range. And when you're looking at these ranges, it's what you'll at least see. So for example, this kind of royal blue color, 20 inches. It's not everyone 20 inches in this band, but at least 20. So it can go from 20 to 29. Indianapolis, 25.5 inches would be our average when you're looking over those past 30 years in that time frame. But much more to the north, you get well connected with Lake Michigan, more lake effect snow chances, 60 plus inches right there at the state line with Indiana and Michigan, 5 inches or so, maybe a little bit more in spots for kind of the boot of Indiana. Big difference from north to south. How much snowfall we picked up though the past couple of years, because we're never average, right? These are just average numbers to kind of paint us a picture. But when you're looking over the past several years, the last time we actually hit average at 25.5 technically was the winter of 14 into 15. Last time we went up really above it was back in 13 and 14. Last year we got close. We had 20 inches or so. We've gotten close at other times, but we've really kind of been near but below average. We've already had a snowy start. We'll see how that plays out. In fact, this is the map for December 1st, what we had. The white color shows you the snowpack that we've had across the North American continent. Pretty much all of Canada has had snow and has that snowpack. The pink color shows you where the ice is and how that's really grown. But look how far south the snow cover has been. Of course, here on the southern end, we'll flip-flop this a lot depending on individual storm systems. But I wanted to point this out because if we're really starting cold like this with a bunch of snowpack, you can enhance what we call source regions. Cold front's got to come from somewhere, right? And our source region for many of our fronts, northern and central Canada, right here over what they also call the prairie pothole region. Look at all these lakes. These are all frozen this time of year. But the cold air really forms over the land, and then it slips on south in these cold fronts. And so, we may see more fronts. We've already seen a colder start or colder end of fall going into the start of winter. If this can hold, we'll continue those fronts coming on through, even if there are at least some weak ones. Now, we won't be below average all winter, but it's definitely been a colder start. I want to switch to something real quick on averages, and then we'll get to our forecast for December. Severe weather. It's something that we have to talk about. We get the jet stream coming in farther from the north, pushing south, and that's the difference between cold air and warm air. And when it's really active, you can get some severe weather, especially on days that warm up in the south, and then a cold front comes in and sparks severe weather. So there's still generally a low chance, but you start to see what we call Dixie Alley light up a little bit in December. We'll continue to do so in January and February. Indianapolis, we're not quite in the zone. Have we had tornadoes? Yes, in the month of December. But the chance is low, and it's definitely more rare, but it's possible. More severe weather reawakens there in December, closer to the Gulf Coast. On average, we don't, but we have gotten them in the past. This map shows you the average number of December tornadoes. Meaning up all the way towards Minnesota, on average, there's a 1. But typically, you've got to be right there in the deep south is when tornado season actually starts pretty early. And then you'll see tornado chances go north and go west, deeper into the winter and eventually into the springtime. But they're going to hoard most of that activity. All right, as promised, what is this December looking like? Of course, here at the beginning of the month, we're trying to take a look as far out as we can. We don't know how the second half of December will be. Plus there's Christmas. Are we going to have a white Christmas or not? Better chances no than yes, but it is possible. When you're looking at the outlook though, generally cooler, but this is kind of tricky. The first 2 weeks of December, we are expecting cooler than normal conditions for Indiana. So a lot of that is being covered by this whole outlook map. I do think by the second half of the month, we will rebound a bit. I don't know how warm we'll get, but we're going to have some warm days. You can't stay literally cold and below average for an entire month. I think we'll have a flip-flop. I think we'll be able to get in on some of this warmth. One reason why we've been cold like this, well, there's a couple different reasons that we may not touch on all today, but we've had La Nina, a weak La Nina that kind of helps keep a more active pattern over us. But we've also noticed more high pressure in the eastern Pacific. What that does is it helps build more warmth, but it kind of blocks the jet stream from diving south to our west. Why does that matter? Well, the jet stream diving south brings snow chances, right? It could dive south over the west coast. It could dive south in the central U.S. It could come right here in Indiana, maybe just the east coast. Well, if you block much of the Rockies and the eastern Pacific or west coastline, you only have so many options for these cold air outbreaks, really central U.S. and Midwest. That includes us. And that's why we've had so many repeated cold fronts. But eventually I do think we'll try to change some of that by the end of the month. We'll maybe have some warmer days around Christmas. I don't know if Christmas is going to be warm or not. Of course, we'll stay with our weather team as we get closer to Christmas Day. But we're definitely starting the month cooler. Maybe a flip-flop will eventually be on the way. Precipitation outlook, let's just say December, but working with me here. December's precipitation outlook. Typically we have wetter conditions either to the north and to the west, or what we're expecting for this month, and maybe the deep south will have more activity too. But here in Indiana, there's really not a big sign one way or another. And remember, you can get several inches of snow, but from a precipitation standpoint, how much water is melted out of that snow is really the key when it comes to, are we below or above average on precipitation? Well, you can get multiple rounds of snow, but still not quite be to where you would typically be on the water equivalent. That kind of gets in the weeds of things. But what we are expecting is a kind of active start to the month. We've already had it. That'll continue for the first 2 weeks of December, and maybe some moderation there by mid to late December, still with some cold fronts, but it's definitely probably going to be a bit more active in December. And one thing we talked about La Nina earlier is that La Nina may come to an end or be super, super, super weak. It's already weak, but be barely kind of registrable later this winter. What that means is this pattern with more of an active jet stream and more frontal systems coming through right over the Great Lakes, that may shut down a little bit. You're still going to get these systems, but maybe not as robust as a La Nina would be if the La Nina comes to an end. What that really means is when we're talking about El Nino and La Nina with the water temperatures out there towards the Pacific, they just don't have as much of an impact. You just kind of have more regional impacts. What's the snow and ice cover looking like? Where are the different high pressures? How is the polar vortex up to the north looking? Is it meandering a little bit? Is it weakening? Is it expanding? Is it moving to one direction or the other? How is it kind of wobbling? So we'll have to really focus more on those rather than kind of painting a broad brush with El Nino or La Nina. That's a look at your December. We'll see. It can be an active month around here. And we're headed to Christmas, but we'll see if it's white or not. But there will definitely be more snow chances. It's already been a snowy start to this cold season, and we'll see if that lasts.